All right, I'm getting a message that this meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. So we are going to go ahead and start. Hi, everybody, and welcome. This is Biotensegrity party number 25 on biotensegrity and energy. And our guests today are Carol Davis and Jim Oschman. Carol, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Nice to be here.
And Carol's in, what town is that in Maine, Carol?
Scarborough, the beach town south of Portland.
Nice. And then Jim, you're in Dover, is that right? Dover, New Hampshire?
That's right.
I know you get around a lot, so we always have to check. And then I'm here with my co-host, Graham Scarr in Nottingham. Hey, Graham.
Hi, Susan.
And Chris Marita Clancy in Deep Cove in the Vancouver area. Hey, Chris.
Hi, Susan. Hi, everyone.
And our wonderful volunteers, Mariana Barreto in Mississauga. Did I say it right?
Mississauga. Hello.
Mississauga.
Hello, everyone.
Outside of Toronto. And there's Lisa, and Lisa's in St. Albert. Lisa,
hello, everyone. Thank you, Sue.
Lisa. And Steve's here with us, Steve Levin. Hey, Steve. Steve's waving. And so before we do too much else, I'd like to turn it over to Jim Oschman, who's going to officiate and do the toast for us. Over to you, Jim.
Okay. I have my water bottle here. This comes from the discovery by Fritz Albert Popp that the heart gives off light. He measured it with a very sensitive photometer. And the toast comes from Neil Diamond. It's simply this: turn on your heart light. Let it shine wherever you go. Let it make a happy glow for all the world to see. I love that song.
That's
May you
fabulous.
all go well in the world and keep toasting or toasted.
Cheers and light. Wow, that's wonderful. So before we get to the main part of the program, we're going to hear a little bit about our sponsors for whom we are so grateful. They support us in doing this every week and have for months now. And I think it's over to you, Graham.
Thanks, Susan. It seems the sponsor list is getting longer every week. So the Biotensegrity Party is an all-volunteer production of the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive and made possible in part through the generous support of our wonderful sponsors. Handspring Publishing in East Lothian, Scotland, producers of highly accessible, easily applied research-based material for movement and manual therapy professionals. They're offering a generous discount coupon to all those on the Biotensegrity Archive mailing list and our Zoom participants. Handspring also produce a weekly newsletter entitled Springboard, which you can join from their website, handspringpublishing.com, and which provides details of their weekly webinar series, Move to Learn, hosted by Elizabeth Larkham. We're also generously supported by Chris Clancy's educational organisation, Embodied Biotensegrity, in Vancouver, British Columbia. And for those of you looking to learn more about biotensegrity, Chris's programs are an excellent resource. Biotensegrity Trailblazers meets twice a month, and I haven't got details on next month's book club, but go on the website, join up, and you'll find out more. The Biotensegrity Party is also sponsored by Artifact Pro of Madrid, Spain, where you can find wonderfully constructed anatomical tensegrity models. Artifact Pro also offers a generous discount coupon to our viewers on the Biotensegrity Archive mailing list and to our Zoom participants. So if you haven't joined up yet, then do so and you get these extra benefits. We're also kindly supported by the British Fascist Symposium in the UK. which not only organises their event every 2 years, but also several other exciting programs that are coming up. And finally, for the support of the First World Fascia Congress, a virtual conference being held on the 24th to 26th of September with lots of well-known speakers. So sign up for that. It's a very good price for 3 days of jam-packed everything about fascia. Over to you, Susan.
All right. Thank you, Graham. And I'm just going to let you know, I myself am not really able to keep track of the chat while I'm sort of jumping around in internet land here with you all. So, but we've got lots of people who are tracking the chat. And if you have any questions for Carol and Jim today, please pop them into the chat. And thanks, Lisa, for putting all those links in the chat from our sponsors. I think at this point we can turn, if you're not one of the sort of main panelists, go ahead and turn your video off. And that gives our friends on YouTube who are watching on YouTube a sort of more focused experience. And don't be concerned if your mic is also turned off. Okay.
Can I just
So-
jump in
Yeah.
here, Susan? I wasn't able to hear when we went live on YouTube, but do we have somebody also monitoring the YouTube channel for questions?
I am.
Okay, great. So if you're here on watching us, joining us from YouTube, Mariana will be there to pass the questions on for Carol and Jim. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Chris. So, you know, it's unfortunately Rachel, who's generally with us, Rachel Tudor, wasn't able to be here today. But it was many, many months ago that it was Rachel who said in one of our meetings, I think we should do something on energy. So I started pondering it at that time, and it's a interesting subject because not only just because as a subject, it's absolutely fascinating and interesting and huge, but it's also interesting because it can, for so many people, get into emotional territory. And there are a lot of grumpy people out in internet land who like to start calling names to the other kids on the playground when we start talking about energy. So I, since that time, and again, it was just months ago, have been thinking, who can we bring to this conversation that will lend value and insight, and who are grounded and informed. And I think, you know, it's so clear that Carol Davis and Jim Oschman are two people who are wonderful for this discussion. I'm pretty much going to turn it over to them in just a minute. They've both been, you know, are really well respected just in the world of science for the work and the contributions that they've done in that field. But their personal curiosity has also taken them out to the borders, the boundaries, the edges, and or what some consider to be the borders and the boundaries and the edges. And for some of us, that's where science really happens, is when we take ourselves out to those edges and we allow that curiosity to sort of to lead our hearts, our illuminated and illuminating hearts, and our curiosity, you know, just brings us to what we need to be finding. So anyway, Carol and Jim have both been working with the biotensegrity paradigm for over 20 years, and very, very few people can say that, have that much time in. And the more I study, you know, these tensegrity models, the more I realize there is to study. So I can't imagine what's going to be, what the world looks like 8 more years in, or 10 more years in. But they're there. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, Carol, and thank you, Jim. And I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Susan. And Jim, I just can't tell you how happy I am to invite you to the table. I think everybody here can identify with this idea that you have good friends who don't know each other. And then you keep thinking, boy, I just wish I could just get everybody together. And that's what we've done today. We've got everybody together to invite Jim Oschman to come and enlighten us about his particular view about fascia and biotensegrity and energy and subtle energy and energy medicine. I first discovered Jim years ago when people were complaining to me in the 90s that what I was doing and teaching wasn't science. And then I think it was John Barnes who said, you got to get his book and Energy Medicine, the Scientific Basis. Now, this is the second edition. The first edition came out in, I think, 99, Jim, was it 99?
2000.
Around in there?
2000.
2000. And then it was followed up very closely by this one, Energy Medicine in Therapeutics and Human Performance, which I think the movement people would be very, very interested in as well. He has stories behind the generation of both of those books that are fascinating. He's a wonderful storyteller. But he's a dear friend too, and he's a soulful scientist, and it's so good to have him here. And with that, I just want to turn it over to you, Jim, and say welcome. And thank you for your wonderful toast from our hearts, and enlighten us.
All right, thank you. I'll let you know who is speaking to you. I was having breakfast in Heidelberg, Germany with Fritz Albert Popp, who was the guy who discovered that the heart gives off light. He also discovered that the third eye and the hands give off light. And he totally surprised me. He turned to me and he said, Jim, you are the Pope of energy medicine. So the Pope is speaking, and my sermon could last all day. How long am I supposed to talk anyway? Will somebody yell at me if I'm getting over?
Yeah, I mean, I know you've got a presentation you want to do, Jim, a slideshow, and you can jump in with that whenever you want. And generally, we keep it between the two of you for about 40 minutes or so, but it can be flexed. And then we open it up to all the questions unless you want them sooner. So it's a tea party. It's a social event. We can be relaxed.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to put my slides on. What do I do to get this to happen? Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay, the living matrix. This is how it came about, as best I can do. I'm interested in energy and tensegrity and massage and movement, bodywork therapies, and cosmology. This is Fritz Albert Popp, biophysicist from Germany. Neil Diamond. And here we have a little tensegrity structure that kids are playing on. And next to it is the spin network, which is the structure of space at the very smallest scale, known as the Planck scale. And it's called the spin network. This is work that I'm very interested in. This is one model of the fabric of space. It's too small for anybody to see, so we can only speculate about it. But what this has to do with the space is the following. Here on the right, you see the collagen triple helix. And you can see the protein which is helical, and there are 3 of them, and each is surrounded with a shell of water called the hydration shell. And I asked the question, and that's one thing that I do, is I ask questions and I wait for answers. And sometimes it takes years to find the answers. And that's okay. I'm very patient. And so it turns out the question is, why did Goddess in her infinite wisdom use a triple helix as the basic building block of the human body? Why is that? And I carried that question with me for years. And of course, now I know the answer completely. The helical structure is also the structure of space. And here's a book, which is very interesting and highly recommended, The Spiral Grain of the Universe by Vladimir Ginsburg. And he's written a series of books discussing the spiral structure of the universe from many different, I think he has now 5 books. They're all fascinating. Nobody reads them, as far as I can determine from looking at Amazon. People just aren't looking where they can find very exciting things. So the reason for the triple helix is, I believe, because there's a resonance between the helical structure of collagen and the fabric of space. And I'm very interested in the fabric of space and how it relates to tensegrity. I'm especially interested right now in Rupert Sheldrake's morphic field. We do not know the structure of the body, how the body forms. We don't know. We have lots of books on embryology and developmental biology, but the question of how the body forms the way it forms is not answered anywhere. We have an answer. DNA is the code for the structure of the body, and that's not true. DNA codes for the proteins, but how the proteins go together to form your finger is not known. And in my opinion, Rupert Sheldrake's concept of the morphic field is a good start. It's certainly, having no explanation, it's better to have an explanation that people can throw stones at, and they certainly do. They really did not like his concept of the morphic field. So I'm studying the fabric of space to see where in that fabric resides the field that gives rise to structures, because if we can reverse engineer that, we will be able to regenerate limbs and organs, which is a worthy project, in my opinion, considering that we send our young people off to war and they get their limbs blown off. And the best work on regeneration is not being done. It's just not much going on. So the history of this, the concept of a cell is, strictly speaking, only a morphological abstraction. Seen from a biological point of view, a cell cannot be considered by itself without taking its environment into account. And I just read an article this morning with these words. Alfred Pischinger in 1991 was the first scientist, and I'm not so sure about that, that's why I put a question mark there, to describe the importance of the extracellular matrix and to state that almost every disease starts within the extracellular matrix. He wasn't the first to say this. I know that A.T. Still said something like this, very much like 100 years before. And this is not an exact quote, but this is close to what he said. The fascia is the place to look for the cause of all diseases and the place to consult for remedies. And Steve and I actually went to the Sutherland Cranial College. I don't know how many years ago it was. We gave talks. And Steve talked about tensegrity, biotensegrity, and I talked about quantum jazz. The head of the Sutherland Cranial College asked me to talk about quantum jazz, and I said, "What's that?" He said, "Read this paper by Mei-Wan Ho." And Mei-Wan Ho describes how the parts of the organism have complete freedom to do whatever dance they want to do. And yet they are all coordinated. They are coherent. They work together. So that's what I talked about. But one of the interesting things was that afterwards, we went to the British School of Osteopathy. Our talks were on a Saturday. The next day, Sunday, we went to the BSO to take part in some experiences. And the organizers of the conference had developed experiences to go along with the stuff that Steve and I talked about. Overnight, they had put together a program, and it was very interesting. And one of the things I realized as this program unfolded was that AT still was really the beginning of alternative medicine, and many of the tenets, one of the basic principles in alternative medicine came from him. And that's an amazing thing to realize. He founded osteopathy. He grew up in Kansas. The Indians killed his parents, and yet he got along with them, and he learned a lot from them. And I think that some of the influence of osteopathy came from Native American teachings. So AT still. There's a wonderful book called Interface by Paul Lee, Mechanisms of Spirit in Osteopathy, trying to bring back the spiritual aspect of osteopathy. And still said the brain is an electric battery. And this was 30 years before Berger in Germany did the first electroencephalograms, showing that the brain produces electricity. So this is an admirable discovery through the fingertips. Still, through his fingertips, perceived the electricity taking place in the brain. I'm very interested in what happens at the fingertips, energetically, therapeutically, and so on. Fingernails are sensors and projectors of energy. They're crystals. One of the discoveries in the last few years is that light is emitted by the fingernails and the toenails. This is from Van Wyk, from the Netherlands. And you can see the light at the fingernails. And fingernails are crystals made of keratin. Crystals are very interesting materials. Physicists love crystals because they're pure, they're single molecules, and I'm gonna have to probably put my bird in the other room, unless you don't mind bird songs.
Jim, I think it's fine. I can almost see the bird in the palm tree behind you. I think that's where it is. I think it's fine.
Anyway, crystals are very interesting from the physics point of view. They're bidirectional antennas. They can emit energy and they can take in energy. And I think some of the sensitivity of body workers to feel what's going on inside of a person's body has to do with their fingernails acting as crystal antennas. And so I invite all who are listening to right now just tune into your fingertips and see if you can feel the energy there. And I can. And I'm just a shy boy from Pittsburgh, but I can still feel the energy in my fingertips. It's great to have crystals, bi-directional antennas, energetic antennas at the tips of our fingers. So I got started in all of this by becoming interested in Rolfing, or structural integration, a process that was developed by Ida Rolf. Originally it was called structural integration and eventually got called Rolfing. And I experienced some of this work and it made a total difference in my life. And I was curious, what was this all about? I bought her book and I read through the whole book and I extracted every one of her statements about what this is. And it was mysterious. Some of the statements were mysterious at first. They sort of sounded sensible. But for example, gravity is the therapist, she said. Well, what does that mean? What on earth is that? And it took a long time, but I finally figured out what she meant by that. So one of the things is that the body is a plastic medium, and you can reshape a person's anatomy. And when they're balanced in the gravity field, lots of things work better. Aches and pains go away, and the benefits spread into other physiological systems. I decided balance must be contagious. When you balance the body anatomically, you balance the circulatory and nervous systems and the skeleton and so on and so on. So I was looking for ideas about how this works. And I realized that lots of therapies do the same thing. A good session of physical therapy, when the person leaves the physical therapist, if you look at them closely, you'll see that they're more towards the vertical. They're better balanced. Do you agree with that, Carol?
Hopefully. I'd like to think so, but it depends, I think, a lot on the mindset and the quality of the physical therapist to move out of linear fix-it mode of a joint and move into a holistic view of the body from a centered place themselves.
Thank you. So the body can be balanced in the gravity field by means of sophisticated deep tissue work on the tendons, ligaments, and other soft tissues. And the Rolfers often take before and after pictures, and you can see the difference. The head is more on top of the spine and so on. This is the logo of the Rolf Institute, and you can see how Rolfing can resolve side to side, front to back, and rotational distortions or imbalances. And the line is called the gravity line. It's a plumb bob that's dropped parallel to the ear, right down through the external malleolus and so on. And this plasticity arises from the properties of this remarkable material called connective tissue, which is a composite material. It consists of, it's like, you know, reinforced concrete has two components. It has the concrete matrix and it has rebar, steel bars in it. Well, in the case of connective tissue, the very strong material is the collagen, and it's surrounded by this amazing material called ground substance. It's a gel, and it's fascinating and worthy of investigation. Not too many people think about it or work on it. It has the interesting property of holding the collagen molecules in place, and yet it's a gel and it can dissolve and reform. It can go from gel to sol and back to gel again. And a lot of the changes that occur in Rolfing and other forms of body work are because of this reversible gel state. So there it is, a composite material consisting of collagen, which is a triple helix, which is a hydrated semiconductor. And half of my fascination with connective tissue is with this concept that collagen is a semiconductor, and you won't find much information on that. This is the work of Albert Szent-Györgyi. Albert Szent-Györgyi is the fellow who got the Nobel Prize in 1937 for the synthesis of vitamin C. He got the Lasker Award for the discovery of actomyosin. He took muscles and he isolated from them actin and myosin in a dish, and he added calcium and ATP, and the fibers, which were floating around, came together into strands, and when he added ATP, they contracted. It was muscle contraction in vitro, muscle contraction in a dish. It was the first important physiological process to be studied outside of the body using isolated proteins. And he was just astounded. This was the most amazing thing, he said in his writings. This was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. And by the way, his writings are very worth reading. He was Hungarian, but he spoke fluent English and he wrote in English, and he was very funny sometimes. He wrote some funny things. Just as an example, he needed a large amount of urine for one of his studies. So he collected urine from the bathroom of an army barracks. And he said in his paper about this, this is the only time a military group has ever been useful. He was not very enthralled by warfare. And in fact, he wrote a book called Listen, Little Man, in which he said, we spend enough money on the military, we could have cured many diseases a long time ago if we put that money into the study of cancer, for example. So here's the ground substance. And this is a diagram from that book that I just showed you by Paul Lee. And you can see that it's an interesting material. It's got different components. It's a reservoir of electrons. So these polyelectrolytes have charges on them, and they attract electrons. And this is very important. Here's a close-up. The ground substance is everywhere in the body, everywhere. Any place you touch, there's ground substance. One of the reasons for that is that we need this body-wide reservoir of electrons that can be recruited when you have an injury. And free radicals are delivered to the injury site by neutrophils. It's the body's defense against bacteria, dirt, anything that gets into a wound. The neutrophils secrete free radicals that tear up damaged cells so that what's called the repair field can form so that the tissue can be repaired. So this reservoir is everywhere, where free radicals might form. And these electrons can be semiconducted through the collagen. They can move through the matrix and neutralize free radicals wherever they form. You can avoid having free radicals in your body by not breathing and not eating. Something that I have never been able to accomplish. An osteopath gave me this beautiful photomicrograph of some ground substance, and you can see the different components in the micrograph. This is keratin sulfate, chondroitin sulfate, and this is called the core protein. It's a beautiful picture. Ida Rolf said, and this was the first thing when I saw the Rolfer, this is the first thing he told me about. In nearly every body, we find dense areas deep in the connective tissue. They can be the size of peas or walnuts or tight bands in the muscles. And what the Rolfer told me was, when we apply pressure to these places, they dissolve. And basically what happens is the ground substance, which is a gel, dissolves. It falls apart. And these inclusions, and in her book, she used this diagram, which is an inflammatory pouch, which I think I have, yes, this is from Hans Selye's book, The Stress of Life, a classic book. And he discovered that he could make these pouches in a rat, for example, by injecting air under the skin. And he made these pouches and he used them to study inflammation and the various hormones and their effects on the inflammatory pouch. And what is fascinating to me is that these can, I believe, develop into serious medical issues. And I think, for example, massage and other forms of body work where the therapist feels these little nodules under the skin, presses on them, and they go away, I think they are preventing something that could develop into a serious condition like cancer or something else. Are these familiar to you, Carol? Do you feel these little lumps?
Of course, everybody does. All you have to do is rub down your arm. Usually the upper arm has quite a collection, but what you're just saying now reminds me of Mina Bissell's work on cancer, where she was able to show that solid tumors, cancer tumors in rats, when you extract the cancer tumor, the mammary tumor from the rat and put it in a petri dish along with the fascia from the rat, it grows. It continues to grow. And then you put the cancer tumor in the same tissue in a petri dish with normal growth medium, and it continues to grow. But if you put the cancer tumor in a petri dish with normal fascia that has not been contaminated by the metastasis of the breast in the rat, the tumor reverts back to normal. This is the work of Mina Bissell, Bissell, M-I-N-A, Bissell, and probably most ideally characterized for those auditory learners from a TED talk that she did on breast cancer. This got everybody excited when it came out about 5 years ago. And of course, the scientists began to look for how can we inject something into the fascia around the tumor to soften the fascia so that the tumor doesn't grow. And of course, here we have the answer here through our hands. And there have been 4 or 5 that I know of documented instances where people who had breast cancer went for myofascial release, barn style myofascial release, and after 4 to 6 weeks of intensive 4 hours a day, there was no sign of any cancer on examination. And the lab would make them take the test over and over again to show that it was really true. So this is really very, very exciting. There was a side study done to say, now wait, is it the pressure of the scaffolding on the tumor from the normal fascia that's reverting the tissue back to normal, or is it the messenger cells, the little cytokines, the integrins, and so forth? And so they removed the cytokines, the integrins, and it grew in normal fascia. So now they knew that it wasn't the actual structure of the fascia that was reverting the tumor back to normal. It was the communication between the cancer cells and the surrounding extracellular matrix that was involved in the growth of the neoplasm. You take that, you put that tumor in normal fascia, where the fascia can communicate with the cells. It's not contaminated, and the cells then go back to normal.
How interesting. Thank you.
Fascinating work. So of course it's wonderful advertisement for those of us who use pressure and elongation to help melt the extracellular matrix energetically to open up the tissue. Now, the thing that we have to be concerned about is what makes you think that you're not going to increase the size of the neoplasm through your pressure and elongation? What makes you think that you're not going to exacerbate it? And so the line of thinking is since the fascial web is all over, ubiquitous throughout the system, to do this energetic work away from, around the breast, around the tumor site, away from it, not directly on top of it, to get the anti-inflammatory aspect of the body back in, being able to get the anti-inflammatory aspect back into the system that's damaged through this metastatic process, or it might not be metastasized, but malignant process, I should say. So stay tuned.
Someone who's done a lot of work that goes along with this is Michael Levin at Tufts. And he's a very young looking guy, looks like a teenager. I met him at a conference in San Diego, and he's producing fascinating research on the relationship between the matrix and tumor cells that goes right along with what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. But the piece that I'm fascinated with in this whole scenario, Jim, is communication and what is being communicated by way of this pathway, this extracellular matrix, the primordial matrix of consciousness that A.T. Still talked about and you talk about in your work. So I don't want to interrupt your slide presentation, but I sure would love for you to talk about how this communication might be taking place.
All right. So plasticity and electron conduction and electron storage arise from the properties of these tissues. And one of the things that happened, my life has been kind of magical, and the right thing always shows up when I need it. That's part of being patient, I guess, just waiting for the right thing to show up. I moved to Woods Hole, Massachusetts in the early 1980s, and I ended up in the room across the hall. My lab was across the hall from Albert St. George's lab. So I got to know him. I got to know his people who worked for him, and one of his proteges became a very good friend of mine. And through reading his work and talking to the people, and the most amazing people came through his door. He had colleagues from all over the world. He was a person who, and there have been a few of these around from time to time, there's a person that you go to with a question and he ends up giving you a Nobel Prize, gives you an idea. He gave people ideas. And one of the things that happened was they had a special symposium in his honor at the Boston University School of Medicine. And all the famous biologists that I had ever heard of came to that conference, and they gave talks, and they talked about how Szent-Györgyi had inspired them. One that was particularly fascinating was Hans Krebs. And you've heard of the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. It used to be called the Szent-Györgyi cycle. In fact, Szent-Györgyi got the Nobel Prize in part for putting the pieces together, but there was one piece that was missing, which was citrate. And he gave the project to Hans Krebs, and Krebs figured out what citrate was doing, and he got a Nobel Prize also. So Szent-Györgyi was the kind of guy who could tell you, give you an idea that you could, if you worked on it, you would really discover something. And one of the fascinating and moving parts was when Hans Krebs said that he had written a note to Albert Szent-Györgyi. This was in, I think, 1939. It was just when the war was beginning. And he wrote a note, and he put it up on the, he put a picture of his note up on the screen. And he wrote to Szent-Györgyi and said, I would like to get a sample of vitamin C, please. Szent-Györgyi had plenty of vitamin C because he was synthesizing it from Hungarian paprika. And Szent-Györgyi wrote back, I'm traveling now. When I get back to the lab, I will send you some vitamin C. And also, I suggest that you might want to get out of Germany right now. And if that interests you, I will talk to Hopkins at Cambridge and see if he might have a space for you. So Hans Krebs moved from Germany to Cambridge, England, worked in Hopkins' lab, and did the work that brought him the Nobel Prize. So that's the kind of, anyway, this was a fascinating, I got to meet some really famous scientists at that conference. And at the end, Dr. Szent-Györgyi gave a talk and they asked for questions. And I summoned my courage in front of this room full of hundreds of the world's foremost scientists. I got up and said, Dr. Szent-Györgyi, do you think collagen, connective tissue, might be part of what you're studying in terms of the movement of electrons? And he said, oh, I can't study something as big as a collagen molecule. I'm very busy with electrons. They occupy all of my attention. And his final comment in his lecture was his advice for scientists. He said, have fun. What a good idea. So he had a lot of fun. He was very lively and very energetic, fascinating person. When I first shook his hand, he almost crushed my hand. He was just a little guy, but he was very strong, very powerful person. And after the symposium was over, these two guys rushed over to me. And they had just arrived from Wales. They were materials scientists who had come to work with Albert Szent-Györgyi in his lab to study collagen and other kinds of molecules for their solid state properties. This is semiconduction, for example.
Right.
And they were thrilled that I asked the question because they had found when they arrived in the US that nobody was interested in what St. George was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that St. George's discovery and demonstration that collagen is a semiconductor turned out to be the basis for a worldwide industry of molecular electronics. Your cell phone and your computer are full of solid state circuits. And a scientist from Australia, a professor from, I think, Adelaide. Is Adelaide in Australia?
Yeah.
I think so. Wrote a paper in which he said that Albert St. George and Millikan were the founders of this international, huge, vast international effort to create molecular circuits. And molecules are very good for making circuits. And it seemed to me that the living matrix, the material, the fascia, and so on, is likely an electronic circuit. Nobody was interested. So far, I found nobody interested except me and Carol. So that's part of how I got started. And those two guys I met, Ron Pethig and Peter Gascoigne, became good friends. And I learned a lot from them. I learned what he meant by semiconduction and what he called electronic biology. He wrote a book on electronic biology, which—
Can I stop you right there, Jim? Just to make the distinction between a superconductor and a semiconductor. And when we're talking about electronics, a lot of people are just say, "Oh, gee, that terminology just doesn't make sense to me." Can you clarify that how it is that this tissue conducts electrons? What do you mean by superconductor, semiconductor?
Okay. There are insulators that do not conduct electricity.
Right.
There are metal wires that do conduct electricity.
Like copper, right.
Like copper. And often the wires are encased in an insulator so that they can't touch and create a short circuit.
Right.
So insulators don't conduct electrons. Conductors conduct electrons, and semiconductors weakly conduct electrons. And they're very important because you can regulate them. You can regulate the way electrons move. So a transistor, for example, which you asked what is a transistor the other day, and I told you that a transistor is a nun who's had a sex change operation. Sorry about that. But transistors are devices that use different materials, and where they join, and any place in the body where you see fibers coming together, you have the possibility of a semiconductor junction. And these can be used to process information. So this is a body-wide, the living matrix is a body-wide semiconductor system. And that is not in the medical literature, and nobody in biomedicine is studying this.
So electrons are being communicated en masse through this tissue in a flow of sorts. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, it's a very sophisticated flow. It's like the flow of information in a computer chip. So that's what I see when I look at, in fact, when I look at anatomy, I see circuits.
Right.
If you look at vertebrae, they have collagen fibers and collagen bundles running through them. And a subluxation disturbs that movement through the soft tissues
Right,
around the spine.
right. And then the whole communication system, I like to think about homeostasis as being, and that's a misnomer. I learned from Joanne Avison a long time ago. There is no stasis in the body. It's really homeodynamics. But what we come to think of as homeostasis is all the systems are working to bring about the natural state. And this is a somewhat of a philosophical difference among biological science, medical sciences, that we are meant to be in a state of healing. We are meant to be whole and centered, and everything working brings about a state of optimum health. I think Mae-Wan Ho talks about the fact that when this superconduction is happening at the highest levels, at the most optimum levels, that is ecstasy, and that is perfect health. And my favorite quote of yours, and this comes from my particular quoting you, so it's from my book, but it was your book that I took it from. The fascia is a semi-conducting liquid crystal matrix which stores and processes vast amounts of subliminal and non-neural information. It is the primordial matrix of consciousness. And this is, I think, the thing that strikes people as being, oh, please don't tell me that, because I just really understand the nervous system. I just got the nervous system, and I don't want to have to try to think about any other ways. And I might be simplifying this, but the nerves are so easy to understand. You can see them, they're cables, and they've got synapses, and we can measure that. We can measure the impulse that goes along. So now you come along and tell me that this whole primordial matrix has this communication system that's hundreds of thousands of times faster than the nervous system. And it's having something to do with keeping us in a state of healing. And when this gets interrupted by fascial restrictions or densities in the gel, then the communication system can't bring about this state of healing. But when we are able to, through pressure and elongation, through traction, through unwinding, through rebounding, through motion of some sorts, bring back the integrity of this communication system, people get up off of our mats, off of our tables, from our music sessions, if we're playing the piano and we're talking about the system working together, that they get up and they say, I feel lighter, I feel more integrated, I feel more whole. There's some interoceptive awareness that's possible when things are all connected and working together. Is that true in your mind?
I agree with that totally. What a beautiful statement you just made. I think you're right on.
Well, this has been what has been driving me from the very beginning of learning in 1989, learning the Barnes method and the connection with the energetic link. That to me was the most important. I came upon the structural piece later that then answered so many of my questions. And I think there are a lot of people in this tea party that's true of too, that we were working and doing things that we recognized were working, but we weren't quite sure how or why. And then when I started writing, I had this ESP with my sister. And so I was constantly trying to figure out how is it that my sister and I can buy the same coat on the same day in two different cities. And I was in awe of that communication system, but I knew it probably had to do with quantum because it was immediate. And I wasn't learning quantum in school. I was learning Newtonian traditional physics. And then I began to think, well, if there is some quantum stuff going on inside of our bodies, it must be at the cellular level. So then I began to read about that. And then I came upon Candace Pert's work of the hormones and the steroids. Well, that answered part of the question. Hormones and steroids and cytokines, They're molecular biological communicators. We don't have to go to electrons and photons. We don't have to do that. We got the chemistry here. But then I began to realize, wait a minute, all of that, those hormones and steroids are made up of atoms. We're talking about atoms here. Everything is based on atoms. And then I began to see, you just cannot separate out the subatomic particle aspect of it. And then yesterday, I don't know, do you have this in your slide presentation, this wonderful picture that you sent me?
I do.
Oh, then I'm going to be quiet.
Well, I don't know. We'll get to it. We're just getting started here.
Yeah, I was wondering the same. I didn't know how much, what percentage of the slide presentation are we through? We're starting to get a few questions, but everybody's mostly lapping it up. So I'm thinking we can go a little bit before we start taking the questions, but because I really do, I think we're loving what we're hearing and we want to hear what you have to say. So please.
We have a lot to say. I'd say I'm 5% of the way through.
Oh, wow.
I hope you're all comfortable. I talked about the ground substance being a source of electrons, and I've been working on for 25 years with 25 other scientists, and we published 25 peer-reviewed articles on earthing, which is the connection of your body to the earth. And this is the most important work that I am privileged to get involved in. How many scientists get to work on something that can be helpful for millions of people? And millions of people are gradually coming to know about it because this book, Earthing, and I wrote the foreword for it. So if you read the book, just read the foreword and it tells you the whole story, but the rest of it's fascinating. This is the work of Clint Ober, and he has developed systems to bring the surface of the earth into your home or office so that you can be connected to the earth while you're sleeping or while you're working. And this is a very nice pad that goes on your bed. It takes about a minute to put it on, put a sheet over it, and lie down on it, and you will always, when you're sleeping, be connected to the earth, and it's the best thing you can do for your health. And the electrons from the earth are nature's best antioxidants, and they take care of inflammation anywhere in your body, and they are conducted through the matrix. And so this brought together, Clint Ober's work on earthing brought together our understanding of semiconduction from Dr. St. Georgi, the recognition that the body can conduct electrons. In fact, the best place to start is kidney 1 on the ball of the foot, and that's an acupuncture point that connects to all of the acupuncture meridians. And that point was put there, that conductive, the goddess, when she designed the foot, put this conductive point right on the ball of the foot so that every step you take when you're walking on the earth, you are bringing electrons into your foot and up through the meridians to every nook and cranny of your body. So that's what the meridians do. Yeah, here's what shows that it's fast is infrared thermography. And after 30 minutes of connecting to the earth, this woman came in with a cane. She had a 6-year-old knee injury, and you can see the inflammation on the left. And in 30 minutes, the inflammation was gone and she went dancing. That's fast. You can take antioxidants till the cows come in. And the problem with antioxidants and with antibiotics is it takes a while for them to get to the place they need to get to. One of my students who's at Winston-Salem at the big university there, did a study with using coils to produce certain frequencies that stop bacteria from producing enzymes that are very destructive. And so energy medicine works. It's the kind of thing that you need in the battlefield where soldiers are injured or shot, and you need to handle the inflammation as fast as you can. Fortunately, there's now battlefield acupuncture. There's a particular high-ranking military official who has introduced acupuncture into the military. Good stuff. And injuries heal very quickly. This was Tour de France. The spoke wheel cut into the leg, immediately grounded with electrode patches on either side. And second day, very little swelling, very little redness, very little pain. And it turns out when the body's connected to the earth immediately after an injury, you only get traces of the classical signs of inflammation. These are the 5 pillars of inflammation that you can read about in medical texts: inflammation, heat, redness, swelling, pain, and loss of function. Those are artifacts that don't have to happen. By being grounded, those things don't happen. Earthing reduces the clumping of red blood cells and reduces blood viscosity. Cardiac disease is the #1 killer in the world. If you know anyone with a cardiovascular issue, tell them to take their shoes and socks off and go out and walk in the grass. It's free, and immediately electrons from the earth enter the circulatory system, coat the red blood cells, and cause them to push apart. That reduces clumping. This is the clumping in 3 different people before grounding, and the clumping is gone after 40 minutes. It's that fast. Elevated blood viscosity is the cause of virtually every kind of cardiovascular disease. And barefoot takes care of it very quickly. This is my Rolfer on the left, Peter Melchior. He was an amazing guy. And he taught me about energy. He worked very closely with Ida Rolf. He was the first teacher of Rolfing. And he was working at Esalen. He was working in the kitchen. And he had terrible back trouble, went to the chiropractor every day. And Dr. Rolf straightened out his back, and he became a teacher of the method. And this is Emmett Hutchins on the right, one of the other teachers. And Peter told me, there he is. That's a poem he wrote. He told me about Harold Saxton Burr. And Burr did an enormous amount of work on energy, on bioelectricity. He did what a number of scientists I know have done. He did very conservative research. He got his academic tenure, could not be fired, permanently employed, and then he started to work on energy, which was a no-no at the medical school at Yale University. He was in the School of Medicine. If you want to study bioelectricity in medical school, if you go to the dean will say, that's very nice, but we don't do that here. We don't study energy. We don't study electricity, magnetism. That's out, forget it. So anyway, there's there's Professor Harold Saxton Burr. This is a portrait hanging in the library at Yale School of Medicine. And he published something like 93 papers between 1932 and 1956, scientific papers on energy. They are beautiful papers. He wrote very well. He has collaborators who were brilliant. They are foundational work on energy medicine. And I wondered, when I started to look into energy medicine, how come when I went to the university and was way overeducated, I spent 20 years in the university, how come I never heard of Harold Saxton Burr? What's the problem? Why don't doctors talk about energy? We're all actually experts on energy. I mean, our senses, our so-called 5 senses, are all energy detectors. Heat, light, sound, and taste, and so on. They're all energy. Vision is vibration, frequencies, where we know where we are in the world by our energetic receptors. So we're all experts on energy. Why the hush-hush about energy? And why aren't physicians interested? And they aren't. They're just not. It's part of the culture, medical culture. And to me, the big problem with energy is it's so effective. Just for example, healing with light is much more effective than healing with pharmaceuticals. Well, that's no good. Our medical system is set up to sell pharmaceuticals. He said the pattern or organization of any biological system is established by a complex field, which is in part determined by its atomic components and which in part determines the behavior and orientation of those components. And this is in a fantastic paper that he did, that Burr did in collaboration with a famous philosopher, FSC Northrop. Brilliant work.
This goes along with the Sheldrake concept, right? The morphogenic field.
Exactly.
In contrast to a wave, it's a field. It's an actual organizational, energetic field that's always, it doesn't wax and wane. It's always there, and it's always doing its work silently on how we're put together. Is that what he's saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what I talked about down in Brazil yesterday was energetic hygiene and keeping your field clean. And the simple discovery is simply this: your thoughts affect your field, and your thoughts affect your body and affect the bodies of the people around you. So we need to do energetic hygiene, thought hygiene. You can't afford, you don't have the luxury of a negative thought. Pay attention to your thoughts. They can make your life beautiful.
Is this different from the electromagnetic field around the body that we know about already?
Well, it turns out that the biggest field of the body is the heart field, generated by electricity going up and down with every heartbeat, up and down through your circulatory system.
Right.
And according to Ampere's law, which is a law of physics, you do not violate the laws of physics. You get severely punished if you violate laws of physics.
Die.
And the law of physics is that the flow of electricity through a conductor, and the blood is a good conductor, generates a magnetic field in the space around the body. And that field has been detected and measured. And there is the equivalent of a tea party in the biomagnetics world. Every 2 years, they have an enormous symposium on biomagnetics, biomagnetism. I
No.
went to one of them in Boston, and the abstracts were like the yellow pages of the phone book. It was that thick. Thousands of scientists all over the world. I mean, if you talk to a physician, they'll tell you, oh, their body doesn't have any field, and if it did, it would be too weak to have any effect on anything. Well, these are thousands of scientists with very sensitive magnetometers that are studying the field around the body.
I'm gonna just jump in because it's almost 20 past, and we do have a number of questions. So can we get to a place, Jim and Carol, where we can be ready to entertain some of the questions that are coming in?
I'm
Well,
ready.
I'll ask Jim, what of your slides do you want to focus on before you leave this presentation? And then we can just open it up to the questions. Well, you just deleted the whole thing, right?
No, I wanted to,
Oh, there we go. You're back.
Yes, if there are, of course, every slide I'm sure is essential.
I just want to jump through and show one
Yes.
thing.
Oh, look how wonderful. This is for our 6-hour program, Jim, that you've got this.
I'm ready.
You are.
The acupuncture meridians, the Gimbar toe, the connection to the cellular matrix down to the nuclear matrix, right? The living matrix from your book. That's an illustration from your book. There is
Yes,
no
and this-
room in the cytoplasm. There's no, it's dense.
This is an animated illustration I made with little red dots to represent electrons, and they buzz around in there. And just to shorten the story, I was a cell biologist, histologist, and I studied cells and tissues and so on. And I went to England. I was working in Cambridge in the Department of Zoology. One of my friends went to the Medical Research Council laboratory and came back and he said, Mark Brecher has discovered proteins that go across, he was studying red blood cells. He's discovered proteins that go across the cell surface, connect the outside with the inside. Of course, everybody knew he was crazy. The thing about new ideas in science is that science absolutely depends on new ideas, and scientists hate new ideas. They attack them immediately. But it turned out that Brecher was right, and I'd give him a Nobel Prize if somebody asked me, because these integrins are profoundly important in health and disease, and they are the links between the extracellular matrix and the cytoplasmic matrix. And I got real excited by this discovery because it connected together the world of connective tissue that I was so fascinated with the world of the inside of the cell, which I had been studying for years. And a few years later, somebody else discovered that there were links across the nuclear envelope connecting to the inside to the nuclear matrix and the DNA. So this was a complete system of systems reaching everywhere in the body. And the components, Dr. St. Georgi and his colleagues discovered that all of the components are semiconductors. And the nice thing about it is that all the parts have been studied in minute detail. So when you talk about holistic, which is a dirty word in the medical school, this is it. This is a whole system that goes everywhere in the body, and we know what the parts are.
Yes. This is the integrating element that makes all holistic therapies work. It is and I've been, my mind has been opened up to the fact that yes, integrins are mechanoreceptors. They are responding to pressure and elongation on the surface, sending the message all the way down to the DNA of the nucleus. But they're more than that. And that when the tubules, the extracellular matrix tubules actually become the cytoskeleton of the cytoplasm, which becomes the cytoskeleton of the nucleus. And so it's not like it just attaches to it. It actually becomes it, and it interpenetrates down through, so that it's all continuous. There are no separations. It's all one tissue, constantly communicating, every cell communicating with every other cell in the body through this matrix of communication that is faster than the speed of light.
And I got my little electrons moving there so you can
You
see
did,
them
I
buzzing
see
around.
that. Right. Never stops, always moving.
And
Always
body
moving.
workers know that when you touch the body in one place, you're touching the whole thing.
The whole system. And many of the body workers that I know, the Bowen people, the Barnes people, the manual therapists that I know particularly, because that's my field that I'm most familiar with. The body therapists probably have their interpretation of this too, that we recognize that there's this concept of fascia coming home to itself. When we find restrictions and we zero in on, center ourselves, zero in on that particular space where we want to start working, intuitively listening, getting out of our left brains, intuitively listening as the fascia literally speaks to us in some sort of language of body, of blocks of thought. We're led in certain ways. And then we move to another place and another place, and they say, oh, I feel that all the way down in my leg or whatever. And then we take our hands off, and the Bowen therapists, as I understand from Kelly Clancy, the Bowen therapists actually take their hands off and wait for the fascia to integrate what has just been done before they go on to the next release or whatever they're talking about, whatever terminology they give to it. And then when you get up off the table or get up off the mat or whatever, that feeling of lightness, of a feeling of I feel like I feel like my legs are finally underneath my pelvis and my pelvis is underneath me. That interoceptive awareness that patients immediately link to health and healing and relief, that to me is part of the joy of being engaged in this process. I don't want to take any more time because I know we want to open up to questions, but I'll turn it back to you, Jim. This to me, though, this picture right here says it all. This is why I wrote that chapter on fascia as being the organizing link to all holistic therapies.
And it turns out that this diagram or diagrams like this are beginning to show up in textbooks, not in medical schools. The diagram of a cell in a medical school text is a cell is like this bubble with stuff floating around inside.
Yeah.
That's not the way cells are. So how can a medical researcher or a doctor investigate cancer and other diseases if they're looking at the totally incorrect and inadequate picture of what cells are like?
Well, that was encouraging to hear that the Harvard Medical School actually did, or Harvard, one of the schools at Harvard, in order to entice students to study cellular biology, put together that Pixar cartoon of the inner life of a cell, that 8-minute cartoon that you can find on YouTube, that through many long words describes the activity of the extracellular matrix, the integrins down into the cytoplasm, into the nucleus, shows the tubules, it shows the mitochondria, it shows the ribosomes, it shows the nuclear apparatus, it's a film on YouTube, The Inner Life of a Cell. And they're doing that in, at least in the basic science program, probably not in the medical school yet, but in the basic science program, to get students to recognize that cells are much more than bags within bags.
Well, there you go.
There you go. But I wanted to just show really quickly too, and then we'll open it up to questions. This one's, can you find that slide, Jim? Of
I
the,
can.
of
I
the,
just recently, they've identified the proteins that go across the nuclear envelope. They're called SUN and KASH, K-A-S-H. And, oh, you mentioned this the other day, after Gumberto spoke at the Fascia Research Congress. When he was done, after an hour and a half of strolling through the cell, strolling through connective tissue, I jumped up and said, look at this. Look how shiny this is. Shininess is reflection, which means there are electrons, free electrons in there. And this is Ron Thompson's picture of a tendon. Look how shiny it is. That means there are free electrons free to move.
right.
We need to do a couple of these.
Apparently so. This is great.
We're coming to it. There's this marvelous,
Jim, have you presented this entire thing as a presentation? And if so, how long did it take?
I've never given the same talk twice.
You're like Steve.
I'm always putting it together.
this is a
This
marvelous
the
way to
one
finish
you were
though.
looking at, Carol?
Yes, this is a marvelous way to finish. This is a good summary. If you can just take this in. Explain to us what we're looking at, Jim.
Molecule to molecule communication, single photons being sent from one molecule to another molecule. And here you see in the distance, two radio stations communicating with each other.
In
Very
ways.
similar electromagnetic fields.
And
This is from a group in Germany. I told my German friend, that I wanted to visit these people in Erlangen and tell them about semiconduction. And he said, oh no, they won't want to talk to you. Because I wrote books on energy medicine, which is no.
No.
No, who knows? Let them speak for themselves.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
And there's that picture of the photon just above there, that one, the photon.
These happy people, look at their happy smiles. They measured the shape of individual photons for the first time. A single pulse of light can contain all kinds of information, sentences and paragraphs of information. So when you talk about the heart light, let your heart light shine, you're illuminating the world with tons of happy information.
As long as you're keeping your energy and your thoughts happy.
Exactly.
That's the driver. The driver is the nature of your thoughts. And we get what we think about. I mean, we know that our lives, look around to our lives, the quality of our lives, and we can see the basic component of the kind of thoughts we have. Because if they're optimistic, if they're positive, then we tend to find ourselves enriched by our experiences in many, many ways all the time. But the pessimists and the negativity, energy down, bad things happen all the time, and so forth. I'm not saying that bad things don't happen to people who are optimists and positive, but the quality of life of moving through it is very, very different. And what we draw to us and what we give off is a very, very different wavelength of compassion and love and excitement of life and so forth. So shall we get out of the slides now and open it up to the room, Susan? Is this a good time for that?
I think it's a great time, and people can turn their cameras on if they want, and we get a kind of wider view of who's here. And Carol, maybe you can take a look at some of these questions. Some of them definitely overlap, and
Right.
and I'll let you sort of choose, because I think
It's difficult, but let me,
Yeah.
Wilbur got in here earlier, and he has a question that relates very much to biotensegrity, and that is this: we understand that in the biotensegrity matrix, there's this constant compression and tension that keeps everything in balance. And of course, it's the compression and tension, and then the product of that. So it's the sum total of that. And Wilbur's question is this, if I might read it, and I think Wilbur might still be on here, so he can chime
he
in.
is. Yeah, he is. We could let Wilbur ask.
I will read it first, Wilbur, just to shorten up it. Would you agree that electrons' environment don't just conduct semiconduct properties, but also create this force field, which is responsible for the tension and compression in the tissue? Would you agree to that, Jim?
What force field?
The force field in biotensegrity, I think, is what he, okay, Wilbur, I'll let you chime in now.
Yeah. So hi Jim. Thanks for your presentation. Excellent. The concept I was trying to bring across is the whole idea of, we talk about tension and compression, and in your presentation you talked about the electrons that are flowing in the extracellular matrix, which is part of the hyaluronic matrix with electrons and protons and everything floating around there. And these molecules, as we know, which is the whole thing about collagen molecules, is that these charges, like charges, don't like each other. So they tend to repel each other. They tend to, there's this field around, there's a force field. So it's not just a matter of conduction. When you look at electrochemistry, there's also a field, and that field has a certain amount of force with it, that repulsion. And so what I'm asking you is that, do you think that this repulsive field is somewhat responsible for the tension that we have within our system? Because we have a lot of, the body's under tension. It is. I mean, that's why we maintain our shape. And I think if you take away the sort of the electron capacity to exist within our system, what happens with dehydration, when you dehydrate collagen, that's why it becomes very hard and crumpled, and you lose that plumpness. And what I'm saying, don't you think that these electrons are also responsible for the force fields? Because of the like charges will repel. Or is that sort of a wishful thinking?
It turns out that like charges attract each other.
Do they?
Yeah, you have to look at Gerald Pollock's book on the fourth phase of water. And he describes this. It's very interesting. But force is a funny word. What does it mean, really? Steve knows.
Well, okay. Okay. The other question I have for you then: do you?
I totally don't have an answer.
But do you agree that gravity can be repulsive as well as attractive?
I don't know. Wilbur, do you mean ground reaction force?
Gravity gravity. The gravitational force can be attractive as well as being repulsive. I mean, so I mean, this is physics. If we believe in some parts of physics, we have to have some kind of descriptive means of describing what sort of activity occur with photons and electrons and stuff. They move, they go from one place to the other, and this is not just, it happens because of, that's the only way we could explain them. We have to use the word of force fields or magnetic fields or whatever. They're different. Magnetic fields can produce force. That's why you have motion. So how else would you explain it?
I gave a talk to a group of movement therapists, and I said, gravity is not a force. They all fell on the floor. They were so happy to hear me say that. They had never heard anybody say gravity is not a force.
And maybe you could elaborate on that? In
Well,
other words, then what is it?
Okay, one of the fascinating things is flying saucers. And people who see, and they do exist and people see them, and they go very fast and they make right-hand turns, and they go whoop, straight up in the air to 7,000 miles an hour. It's just totally amazing. And nobody seems to know how to explain that. And the way to explain that happens to be that there is a way with spin to eliminate inertia. So they're not anti-gravity. Anti-gravity is not the way flying saucers move. They move. It's, for example, when you slam on the brakes, the reason your head goes through the windshield is because of inertia. If we had an inertia canceling device, that wouldn't happen. So that's what they have in the center of a flying saucer. They have something that's spinning, that's creating, taking away the inertia so that they can go very fast and make right-hand turns and sudden stops without the occupants slamming up against the wall. Gravity is not a force. And there's a book by William Day, A New Physics, which goes into this in great detail. So when I went and talked to those movement therapists about gravity isn't a force, I got that from William Day's book, A New Physics. When you study the human body, if you want to understand the human body, you have to study everything. I have found that out. If you want to understand tensegrity, you have to study everything. There's poetry, there's music, there's biophysics, there's engineering, you name it. So if you're not ready to study everything, you'll never figure anything out. I study everything.
Elizabeth Larkham has a very interesting question, Jim, about the connection between that wonderful was it Roger Penrose that made that space, that cosmological space diagram of the fabric of space?
Yes, the spin network.
Yeah, the spin network. And she wants to know, illustrating well with a diagram, would you relate this concept of the fabric of space to the characteristics of biotensegrity? Obviously, the structural aspect is there. The polygons that are united through force fields, wasn't that the drawing, the force field drawing of the fabric of space?
Yes, and the connections, the little connections between nodes are spinning. There's axes of spin. And that's at the Planck scale. It's the smallest scale we know of. Nobody can see it. It's way too small. And the distance between the nodes is called the Planck length, and there is Planck time, which is how long it takes a photon, to go from one node to the other. It's one of the models of space. We have to look at all of them again, because nobody can see that small.
Yeah, I've seen the pictures of the fabric of space bending around objects, and that concept of the fabric of space is familiar to me, but I'd never seen, and when it's listed that way, it's always an open net. I mean, the pictures that I've seen, it's always an open net, the fabric of space, but I've never seen it in a diagram that is so dramatically like the tensegrity structure that the children are climbing on.
How about that?
Yeah.
Which I will say is not a tensegrity. That was, I think, maybe a icosahedron.
Yes, it doesn't have the push-pull, it's solid.
Yes.
Yeah.
But related, certainly.
Right, structurally related, yeah.
Did I steal that diagram from you, Susan?
Not from me, Jim, but you steal anything you like.
Thank you.
It's an honor to have you steal.
Well, I have lots of slides. Steal anything you want.
Thanks.
Do you have ideas about whether water is as effective as earth in the idea of grounding, of giving us electrons? We know that if we stand near ocean water, for example, the electrons will just flow right to us in the atmosphere of the salt water. And Chris Clancy talks about when she swims in the ocean, she feels a tremendous anti-inflammatory effect on her body, and the colder the better even. Do you believe that water is another way that we work to help self-heal ourselves from inflammation?
Oh, stick your feet in seawater and you're really connected. You're connected to 3/5 of the Earth's surface. And the oceans act as antennas, so you're connected to the universe.
Ah, the oceans act as antennas.
And salt water is loaded with electrons. At Woods Hole, I noticed people would come, they'd have some skin problem. They'd go swimming in the ocean once and their skin problem would go away.
Yeah.
Very anti-inflammatory.
Mm-hmm.
Let's all go swimming. Right here.
Right, right. You didn't get a chance to go too much into the concept of spiral dynamics, and I was looking to see if somebody had a question about, this might be related. Summer Eunice wants to know what triggers the electrons to move to the injury site. What instigates this process? Is it just the cytokines, or is it small? Is it subatomic?
There's a guy who got a Nobel Prize for explaining how charges attract each other. The free radicals are looking for an electron.
Right, they want to balance.
Yeah, so there's a gradient and the electrons follow the gradient to get to the places where they're needed.
Uh-huh.
That's not a very complete picture.
Well, Wilbur was getting at that too. What makes the motion? And I asked you this before, and this is the question. You know, where does the stimulus for all of those little red dots come from? What is the charge? What is the stimulus for everything is always moving, even actually until after the point of death? Where does that come from?
Well, it comes from the 0-point field, the field that you're immersed in, that's everywhere. And one of the illustrations I have is a cross-section of muscle. If you look at a cross-section of muscle, you see hexagonal packing of the myosin, and then around them, hexagonally packed actin molecules. It's a crystal. It's
Uh-huh.
absolutely a crystal.
Uh-huh.
And its geometry, I think, is perfect for extracting energy from the 0-point field, which is also has a crystalline fabric to it. Empty space is not empty. It has a fabric, and it contains an enormous amount of energy. Archibald Wheeler worked it out, and it's one of the biggest numbers in the universe. How much energy is in, for example, the amount of matter in a sugar cube, a centimeter on a side. So there's energy everywhere. And there are studies, and I've been looking them up. We have this idea, we get our energy from breakfast. And it may be that we
The
don't.
Kellogg people want you to think that too.
Yeah.
That's how the Kellogg
Kellogg's.
cereals got started, right? Mhm.
So when you look at energy, you find lots of anomalies. You find lots of weird things. And they're very interesting. To me, the weird stuff is the stuff to study.
And remember that Nobel Prize that was given to the scientist who discovered that only 60% of muscle contraction actually comes from the energy from the mitochondria. Where is the extra 40% coming from? And Mark Cummings did that marvelous work on looking at photons. And you mentioned Fritz Albert Popp and his work on photons. It's not being done in the United States at all. But the idea that we're constantly taking in photons and giving off photons, and could this be the extra 40% of energy that's coming into us? And then this relates to our discussions about photosynthesis and how leaves through their chlorophyll take in the photons from the sun and actually use it to metabolize food for the tree through the photosynthesis process. And the whole spiral idea well, I'll leave it there. Would you like to comment on, you said something about chlorophyll earlier, about generating our own food one day.
And maybe it's a good place for you to talk about your worms too, Jim. Also, I just want to say that we are going to try to wrap up in about 10 minutes if it's all right. That'll be the 2-hour mark, if you can believe it. So, so I'll just put it there. Thank you.
Time flies when you're having fun.
It does.
Or as the frog said, time's fun when you're having flies.
Okay.
My depressed friend said, he said, I forget what he said. He said something depressing about.
That's depressing.
Oh, well.
Well, we were talking about chlorophyll and about photons coming in and providing the light source for energy for muscle contraction, for example, and the importance of photons. But I'm curious about your idea about the spiral that goes from the top, from the crown of the head, the vertex of the skull, all the way down through, and even on the inner lining of the capillaries. Is that true? Is that what you say?
Yes, there's a spiral, grooves. Actually, it's in the arteries, in the arterioles.
The arteries.
Yeah, and it disappears upon death, so the anatomists don't find it. You have to look at the walls of the aorta and the arterioles with fiber optic imaging, and you can see the grooves, the spiral grooves. So blood flows in a helix.
In a helix.
One of the Russick and Schwartz did a very interesting paper on energetic cardiology, and they explained that the heart doesn't just pump blood, In fact, it actually may not pump the blood. The heart produces a sound pulse, a pressure pulse, an electrical pulse, a magnetic pulse, and a light pulse, and a scalar pulse. And the blood spirals through the aorta, which is very interesting, because the conductor of the electricity, the conductor of the heart's electricity, is moving in a vortex, like through a coil. And that generates a large field. You want to generate a large field. A straight wire has a magnetic field around it. And if you want to generate a big field, you wind it into a coil. And that's what happens in the aorta.
I'd like
And
to invite John Sharkey to chime in, if you would, John. I saw him make one cut through the heart of a person and unwind it in one continuous tissue, and then spiral it back up and unwind it and spiral it back up. John, do you want to comment here?
Or maybe Jim has his heart model with him.
I do.
Jim, if you have that
Right here.
handy. Yeah. John, you've got one too, I think. Yes.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
Oh, no, sorry, I didn't mean to steal Jim's wind. Is Jim gone to get the heart model? I'm sorry now, I didn't mean to do that.
No, it's good. The more the merrier.
No, well, if it's Jim's presentation, so sorry.
I think this is very important.
James, you and I, here we go together, look.
There it is.
There it is. But James, sorry, I didn't mean to steal your wind. It's your show, I didn't mean to do that, sorry.
I've got plenty of wind.
But no, James is absolutely correct. It's a vortex well, remember this is a hypothesis, and we have to argue this, and others have to come back and give their defense, and that's what science is about. I'm listening to James for a good portion of my life, and you're just an incredible human being, James. Something I want to say on a personal basis is James introduced me to May Wan Ho and brought me to dinner, which was such a great privilege. He said, John, I want to introduce you to this person. I had no idea who he was introducing me to. I was there with Dr. Leon Chatow. And I think there's a lot of people who are going to be listening in to this presentation. So please don't be overly concerned that you're confused or that you're lost, because you're listening to somebody who has a lifetime of facts and information, perhaps beyond what you could imagine. The experiences that James Oschman has gone through, we couldn't imagine them. We could spend weeks listening to James. The situation is, though, I think sometimes, and forgive me, by the way, I'm dyspraxic, so from that viewpoint, words mean a huge amount to me. And I love, Wilbur was asking the question, but he used this idea that, electrons and protons don't like each other. They love each other. It's a dance. And one can't live without the other. Let's throw away this old language of agonist, antagonist. That's what we need to get rid of. And that's very, very hard to do, because I think so many people are institutionalized. It's very hard to get a hold of this new paradigm. So, so from that viewpoint, I just want to say thank you. Do you know what, James? May Wan Ho said to me, as an example, and I've spoken to Joanne Avison about this on a few occasions. I don't know if you remember this. She said to me over that dinner that we had together, she said to me, John, the way people describe DNA and even the images that they portray, if DNA was truly constructed that way, it would explode.
Exactly.
And that blew me away, that there's just one small point that this woman, who was a genius, made, and yet nothing has come of that. It was a comment she made to me over dinner, and I thought to myself, because I respected her, had huge respect for her, and I thought to myself, my gosh, there's so much that we have to change, there's so much that we have to learn. Mm-hmm. So it's not a very easy, simple thing to grasp, but we can learn from the likes of Carl and James and others. You can piggyback on their knowledge, But it's a journey, James, isn't it? It's not something that they're going to get in an instant, 2 hours. They have to participate in that journey, don't they?
Oh, it's a wonderful journey.
It's a wonderful journey, yes. A little frustrating at times because you end up knowing something that somebody else doesn't know. And as Joanna Adenson always says, you can't know what you don't know. And when you're discussing things with people, they don't know. So that can be a little bit frustrating. But thank you, James. That was wonderful. You've entertained me for the last 2 hours. And
Well,
I've
that's
heard
my
you
purpose.
many times, and you're always different. You're right. Every presentation is always somewhat different to the last.
May Wan liked me because when she organized a conference and put out the word, I was always the first one to say, yes, I will come.
And you also mentioned Jared Pollock's work. Please, everybody, make yourself familiar with Jared Pollock's work, please.
I was just about to say. I found this the other day, John. Can I be heard? Yeah. I just want to say, you showed me, we've had that conversation several times about what May Wan Ho said to you, because you know she's one of my heroines. Of course you are too, James. That was just brilliant. And you won't remember me, but I knew you back in the late 90s when I was studying with Tom Myers, and you were one of our teachers. So thank you, because it guided my understanding. And you told me the story of how Ida Rolf came to ask you to do energy assessments of Rolfing, and it inspired me to take the work where I've taken it, whether that's good or bad. But all I wanted to say here was that you were talking to me, John, about in fact, you've shown me the picture of what May Wan Ho said the DNA probably looked like. And I found this, it's like an aluminium coil thing for cleaning saucepans. And this was very much like the picture, the photograph you showed me. And when you pull it apart, it's actually very, very tightly coiled ribbons of aluminium. Mm-hmm. And her work and Burr's work and Gerald Pollock's work all came together for me when actually it was Leonid Blyum who pointed out to me that why my passion for biotensegrity was kind of not natural, but where I come from. I spent 20 years as a chocolatier, and chocolate is a liquid crystal medium. And you learn to really respect these the qualities of emergent properties that come from moment to moment of change, and the folding of a liquid crystal matrix and how it folds. And I tend to describe gravity in terms of folding. And it's just been amazing for me to read so much about May Wan Ho and Gerald Pollock and putting it together, and how they talk about the liquid crystal matrix around everything that does repel and attract, but in its wholeness, exactly, the rainbow and the worm, in its wholeness, it invites fields. So you get different fields of different integrities within the fluid matrix. And there is repulsion and there is attraction, but it's in a constant change, which of course Steve then reflects in biotensegrity as everything is in a constant state of flux from tension and compression. And I think biotensegrity is such a powerful structural way of describing our way through these fields, because you know, John and I particularly spend a lot of time presenting how biotensegrity is actually applied in the world, and his interface with science, and how we can actually make it hit the ground running for the participants in courses. And what biotensegrity gives us is such a fabulous and rigorous platform on which to stand on every scale. And so I wondered if you know, whether we're talking about liquid, whether we're talking about solid, whether we're talking about changing from sol to gel, whether we're talking about temperature changes, whether we're talking about movement or manual therapy in the gross or in the molecular level, we have this incredible biotensegral metaphor, if you will. It's more than a metaphor, for me it explains nature, but it's such a powerful playground to make sense of all of this, and I wonder if you would say something about that.
And we're really past our time, so maybe it could be pretty quick. It would be nice to have also, thank you, Joe, and thank you, Don, and maybe we could have last words if there's time from Steve and Jim and Carol, and we want to thank sponsors before we close as well. So let's see what we can squeeze in. Thank you.
Well, I have to say that Jim has entertained me for over 30 years. We've been bouncing off one another directly and indirectly for over 30 years. And I think we gain a lot from each other's work. And I certainly learned a lot. And he had me come and speak at a energy medicine meeting in Colorado once, and it was extremely entertaining for me because I've met Maywan Ho there and Deepak Chopra and several others. It was very exciting, and he always excites me.
And people loved your talk. They were very excited by you.
Wonderful.
You're an excited electron.
But I just say just how excited I found this whole concept. Being a microbiologist, I've never sort of looked at this bodily electrical systems. It throws a complete sort of new viewpoint. So I'm just so impressed by what everyone's been talking about. Just
Wonderful.
It's a big story.
Very
Yes.
big story, yes.
Everyone's asking that we please do this again, because clearly we only got through a small percentage of the slideshow.
Can I
But
just
maybe we could get some closing thoughts from everybody. What do you think, Carol?
I just wanted to close up to thank Jim very, very much for this marvelous presentation, and I wanted to remind him and all of us, I think I might have told this story before, that the curiosity that is Jim inspires my curiosity. And we were all day at a conference at Harvard in 2016, I believe, on cancer and fascia and acupuncture. And there were paper after paper after paper. Helena Langevin was part of the conveners, and Jim and I were sitting next to each other, and paper after paper after paper about collagen. And we were very interested in what they had to say about collagen. But in the afternoon, we started to ask ourselves, why doesn't somebody talk about the gel, the mucopolysaccharide gel? Nobody was talking about the matrix part of the gel part of the matrix. And so finally it came time for questions, and he stood up to stand in line to ask the question. He said, I'm going to ask. So he stood up, and Robert Schleip was there, and Robert came and stood behind Jim. And little by little, he started edging forward to the microphone. And then finally, they almost got to him, and they said, well, time's up. And Jim, being the consummate gentleman, of course, he said, oh, well. And then he came and sat back down again. Robert Schleip did not sit back down. He went straight to the mic. And of course, he was recognized and by the conveners. And he said, has anyone thought about studying the gel? And so Jim turned to me and I turned to him, and we laughed. And that was, nobody's thought about studying the gel.
And of course, that's the soft matter aspect.
That's the soft matter. That is the part that seems to melt, or at least change. We didn't talk too much about piezo. That was another question about piezoelectricity and surface transmission of conducting this information and softening of the gel and getting rid of the restrictions, which seems to be what we can do most by hydration and by motion and by what we're doing therapeutically to open up this system. That's a whole nother topic, but get his book, Energy Medicine, The Scientific Basis. He goes into nice detail about this in it. And my book, I also go into some detail about the Barnes perspective about this based on Oschman's science and other people's science. So there's a lot out there for you to read. So thank you, Jim. And thanks, Susan, and all the other conveners for inviting us to do this wonderful presentation.
And next time we get together, we'll give everybody a test to make sure they read all that stuff.
Right.
So thank you, both of you. It's been so exciting, and I cannot count the number of requests in the chat where people said, let's do this again. Let's do this again. I will say that coming up next week, we're going to discuss dynamical diseases. And I don't know if anybody's got, I think we put the link to the paper maybe in the newsletter. Maybe people can put it in the chat and even in the YouTube chat, but this dynamical diseases concept is something Steve came up with, or keyed into, I'll say, and folded in, saw how it perfectly fit with biotensegrity. This was quite a while ago. And we've really been mining this paper, and Doug Johnson in particular has done a lot of work with the concept with Steve over the years. So we're going to do that next week. And then the question came up about when we're going to be doing a zoo. We're going to do another model zoo episode on October 16th. So we'll be looking at a lot of different models at that time. We are also looking to organize another multilingual Biotensegrity party, perhaps in December. So particularly if you are of a language that is somewhat underrepresented, or you have a community that's very, much based in another language, and we want to find out about you. We want to all get connected. We had no idea. I mean, it's so wonderful what's happening in these language-based communities. Spain, Portugal, well, Spanish, Portuguese, Brazil, South America, and Spain, and Portugal. And we had great community contact, people in Greece, Russia, the German language-based group. So would love to hear from the people who are studying this. I know that Graham's book's been translated into Korean and Polish and Chinese, and I would love to connect with some of these communities as well. Steve, did you have something you wanted to say before we go to the sponsors?
No, just thank you. I mean, Jim and I, as I said, are old friends, and we've worked together on and off for many years, and I really appreciate what he does, and thank him so much for coming to this meeting for us.
All right.
Thanks for the invite.
And Graham, are you going to do the sponsors again?
Yes, that's fine, Susan.
Great.
The Biotensegrity Tea Party is an all-volunteer production of the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive, and made possible through the generous support of our wonderful sponsors. Starting with Handspring Publishing in East Lothian, Scotland, producers of highly accessible, easily applied research-based material for movement and manual therapy professionals. They're offering a generous discount coupon on all their books to those on the Biotensegrity Archive mailing list and our Zoom participants. Handspring also produce a weekly newsletter entitled Springboard, which you can join from their website, handspringpublishing.com, and that provides details of their weekly webinar series, Move to Learn, hosted by Elizabeth Larkham. We're also supported by Chris Clancy's educational organisation, Embodied Biotensegrity in Vancouver. And for those of you looking to learn more about biotensegrity, Chris's programs are an excellent resource. Biotensegrity Trailblazers, for example, meets twice a month. The Biotensegrity Tea Party is also sponsored by Artifact Pro of Madrid, Spain, where you can find wonderfully constructed anatomical tensegrity models. Artifact Pro also offers a generous discount coupon to our viewers on the Biotensegrity Archive mailing list. We're kindly supported by the British Fascist Symposium in the UK, which not only organises their event every 2 years, but also other exciting programmes that are coming up soon. And finally, for the support of the First World Fascia Congress, a virtual conference being held on the 24th to 26th of September with lots of well-known speakers. So see you all then, and next week's tea party as well.
Thanks, Graham. And Carol, you want to do the closing toast?
I'd love to. Let's toast to curiosity and to new frontiers that we're opening through our discussions and through our minds and through our hearts, linking us all together in one wonderful field of energy. And to Steve Levin, to Jim Oschman, and all our pioneers. Toast.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.